Okay, well, we're at 12 noon, top of the hour. So I want to say hello to everyone and welcome to our Northeast SARE webinar. Today we will be hearing about Northeast SARE Farmer Grants from Grant Coordinator Carol Delaney and Farmer Grant recipient Jordan Kramer of Winnegance Oyster Farm in Portland, Maine. My name is Deb Haliba, and I work at Northeast SARE as our communications specialist. And as you know, Northeast SARE offers a suite of competitive grant programs to advance sustainable agriculture throughout the 12 Northeast states and District of Columbia. At the center of all of our grant programs are farmers who participate in projects as learners and teachers and partners and researchers as in the Farmer Grant program. So before I turn the mic over to Carol, I wanted to go over some quick housekeeping details. Today's webinar is scheduled for 60 minutes and we have a lot of ground to cover, but we will aim to end at 1 p.m. We are recording today's webinars and you'll be able to find the recording on our website as well as on our YouTube channel in the coming week. Carol has organized some breaks during the presentation to take your questions. And so to pose a question, I encourage you to use the question box, which is the little folder with a Q on it. You'll just open that up and type in your question. We'll try not to use the chat box today so we can be organized. And I'm going to be helping Carol and Jordan managing your questions. So I will be popping in here and there, but we'll mostly be in the background if you need me. And with that, I will turn it over to Carol.
Great, thanks, Deb. Appreciate it. Yes, so I'm Carol Delaney, and I am the Farmer and Partnership Grant Program Coordinator. So if you have questions after the webinar, you would email or call me for those. Also with me is Jordan Kramer, and who's received more than one farmer grant. So why don't you introduce yourself, Jordan?
So I'm Jordan Kramer. I run Winnegance Oyster Farm. We grow oysters, little neck clams, algae, trying some urchins, and a few other things. I've worked with SARE on 4 different projects, ranging from using tidal energy to clean and tumble oysters to 2 different projects looking at polyculture of oysters and little neck clams. And my most recent project is using shading as a passive way to prevent algal biofouling on an oyster farm.
And you're in Maine. Maybe you said that.
Yeah, so I live in Portland, Maine, and the farm is in West Bath, Maine.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're going to jump right in. And so first, Northeast SARE is a federal grant program funded by USDA, NIFA, and there are 4 regions. So our Northeast region serves these 12 states and Washington, D.C. So the first stop is that you need to be from the Northeast, or the research needs to be in the Northeast. The second thing I'd like to go over is our portfolio, so you can kind of get an idea of what we fund. So the Farmer Grant Program in this past year, this is 2019, is one of 6 grant programs that we have. So last year, 56 proposals were submitted, 31 projects were approved, and the application success rate, that's 55%. So that's not too shabby as grant programs go. It still is competitive. You've got to really convince the reviewers that this will give results that will help other farmers. And I just wanted to let you know what your odds are. And also the grant program right below the farmer grant, the partnership grant, is very similar in that it can be the same topic, but for that program, the applicant is not a farmer, but they have to work with a farmer. So if you're listening and you're not a farmer, but you want to work with one, that could be the program for you. And that deadline for that is in April next year. And the total amount of money that you can ask SARE to fund is $15,000 over 1 to 3 years. Okay, so the goal today is, well, what's the goal of the program? What does SARE look to fund? Who can apply, eligibility, and what topics? This is common questions we get that we want to cover for you today. And if you're finally are revved up to apply, well then how can you write the best proposals? What do reviewers look for? Okay, let's jump right in. So first is SARE wants to help, its mission is to help farms be more sustainable in the Northeast. And there are common themes. These are our 5 common themes of sustainability. We want to improve stewardship of the land and environment, increase your productivity, which could be decreasing costs or increasing income, stewarding the land and water. Make sure that farms fit in well with their communities and are supported by their communities. And then ensure the continuation of farming by improving the quality of life for farmers, employees, and their neighbors. So the bottom line is this will benefit not only your farm, but other farms as well.
So the first thing is, do you qualify to apply for a SARE grant? And you need to be, it's a USDA definition, but it's sort of a low bar, but a commercial operation is one that has $1,000 of regular sales per year. So I give an example. The first one is an urban farm in Binghamton. They actually sell at CSAs. They sell a CSA and at farmers market. So even though they're an urban farm and they might also do other activities on their farm, they are commercial. The second example at the bottom, if the primary mission is more education or gardening, that does not qualify as a farm. So that wouldn't, it wouldn't pass muster. If you have a question, you can ask me directly if you think. Nonprofits can have farms, just like I mentioned Binghamton, that's a nonprofit, but the farm part is for profit. So there's a lot of categories, and one very useful document, which I'll mention later, is what is a farm? We actually have a document that kind of goes into more nuance about that. Now, what topics? That's really a very common question, and it can be any topic. We don't favor one over the other, livestock versus vegetables versus marketing. So here's last year, we had aquaculture, seaweed. We do, bees are very common, usually honeybee health, sometimes pollinators, crops, new crops, or how to produce a crop better, livestock, all livestock, commercial livestock. Marketing is a very common one too. So you don't have to do just the production. Looking at mushrooms, I'm going down the list here. They're looking at electrolyzed water to see if it helps mushrooms grow better, keep disease down. Nori seaweed off the coast of Maine. All sorts of use of cover crops. It's very common in the Farmer Grant program that farmers, because they're very innovative, they design things. So we'll pay for the cost of designing some of the materials for, and in this last year, kosher poultry processing. A grain perler, there's a farmer in Pennsylvania, is very handy, and he's built other machines as well. And modular meat processing, a vegetable harvester. We also support silvopasture and definitely soil fertility. So this is just kind of a litany of topics, but it could be anything. And again, as I said, the topic areas, there's certain livestock, there's certain commodities. However, you can have an idea, like you want to do a prototype. You can invent something based on something you saw somewhere else. You can take a practice that's used in another type of farming. For example, we had a cranberry farmer who saw no-till vegetable farming, and he incorporated that into his cranberry farm to do no-till cranberry planting to decrease the cost by $10,000 an acre. So there might be a method out there that would help other farmers, but nobody's using it. So you could do more demonstration education. So that's definitely applicable too. And we have a farmer here, Willie Crosby, who's a mushroom farmer, and he loves education. So he's been developing handbooks on how to grow mushrooms. So then again, we just want to make sure if you do want to test a product and you're creating a prototype, it has to benefit others, not just you. Sometimes people want to develop things and sell it, and that's totally fine. But if SARE pays for you to create a device, then you need to share how that's built.
And if you want to keep it a secret, then you shouldn't ask SARE to fund it. Product development, again, you would expect to, and Jordan did this, built some different prototypes to prevent fouling in his oysters. So he has a material list. How do you build it? That will be shared. Software too, there'll be open source or freeware descriptions for others to use. And they have to be safe. So if something is illegal, we can't fund it. And if you're just testing different things that already exist, you don't have to share the recipe, so to speak. So sometimes companies will be selling things and you don't know if they really work as compared to another one. So you're very welcome. SARE could buy the products for you. A lot of times it's supplements, additives for the soil, and you can do a test that way. Okay, so now you know if you're eligible topics and if you're a farmer or not. This is what we do. It's competitive, as I said. The best proposals are funded. We don't look for a certain topic area. We only want one proposal per farm. We feel like that's all you can handle. Why have many and also give other farmers a chance? And as I mentioned, there's a document called What is a Farm? And to help clear up any questions. We require a technical advisor because we have found that that improves the quality of the application, if only for them to look over your proposal before you submit it. You need to know that this is a reimbursement process. If you are awarded the grant, we don't just send you the money up front. You have to invoice up to every month after you sign a contract. And so you have to have the capacity to, front the money first, document the costs, and then submit it to us. And it's usually about a 2 to 4 week turnaround. You will have to fill out a budget justification. It's sort of like applying for a loan in a way, but if you want to buy something, you have to show how many, what's it for, and what's the unit cost. And we have a whole spreadsheet for you to use for that. Okay, Jordan, we're gonna let Jordan talk about his application process and having grants, and he'll share some tips with you.
Hi, so I've done a number of grants with SARE, and I'll start with my first one, because I think if you're starting out as a new applicant, it's good to know really how long it takes, how to prepare the application, things you might need to know that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So know your background. Know if you're coming from just farming, if you have some science background, you're going to need sort of different resources at the beginning. Finding a technical advisor that can help you design your project, if you've never done experimental design, might be really useful. Figuring out what sort of data you need to take, making sure your results are not looking at too many things at once. You're testing not too many variables at a time. So that can be really useful. I would say that your first application, if you've never applied for a grant before, could take as much as 30 or 40 hours. That's not just you're filling out the application, but you'll need to make technical diagrams if you're building something, budgeting, experimental design. It's a relatively time-consuming process. You're going to need to do literature review if you're going to make sure that this has not been done before. There's a few different ways to do that. Looking through old SARE projects is a really good way to start. Then using things like Google Scholar to look or trade publications to see whether or not other people have done this, because SARE doesn't like to duplicate. You can test things in a different environment. You can test things with different application, but you want to make sure you've really got your bases covered in terms of what has been done in the topic before. There's a lot of work that goes into budgeting. The big thing is figuring out how much time you're going to spend on this and how much that sort of takes away from your other farming. There's a few different things you'll need. So the time it takes to prepare your experiment, to run your experiment, and then the time it takes to prepare your farm for the experiment, which might not seem as direct as what it'll take to run it. You may have to clear a field or something that you wouldn't normally have to do. So figure out all your time costs. Let's see. Carol, if you want to tell me sort of what other aspects you'd like me to touch on in this sort of
Yeah,
section.
well, yeah, well, you can talk about what you maybe had to do to get ready and any surprises along the way or tips. You've given some good tips, but so what did you have to do to prepare, say, for this first farmer grant that you received?
So for this first one, I needed to find a field site. Part of it was with aquaculture, you're very often, your license lets you do very specific things on your farm. So I wasn't able to test this particular set of equipment on my farm at the beginning. It was already, all my space was used up. So I worked with the University of Maine's Cooperative Extension Program, and they allowed me to use one of their aquaculture field sites to set up my experiment for the season. There may be other analogous things. That was a relatively time-consuming process, figuring out how to get that part set up. There may be things like building equipment, but if you're ordering stuff that has to be built to spec, that's another thing that you may really have to plan ahead on, knowing how long it's going to take, because most of these projects are going to be a year long, up to 3. But if you lose part of a growing season, you've lost a big chunk of your ability to test out your process. So knowing how long it's going to take to get things built by yourself or by somebody else, making sure you know where you can get equipment in a fast and reliable way. I mean, some of the cages you see in the right-hand photo, I had them set to come before the seed came, and they came the day the seed came, and it was really tricky making sure all the moving parts work and running my normal farm operations. So this is a pretty big time commitment if you're doing one of these projects, and figuring out a way to both keep your own farm sustainable and running, and being able to test your new process, because things, in certain projects, your measurements are going to be your most time-consuming thing, and it's not going to be what the process would be if you were just using this technique in the field without having to measure it.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop you there, but just ask about, back up a little, and when you were given the award, can you talk about the setting up the award process, how that went for you?
Sure. So if you
remember.
Find out whether you've received your award in February. Typically it can be into March. And if you're working in farming, you may have to order seed early on. You're only able to invoice things that you've purchased after your approval date. So work that into your plan. That can be really tricky. I typically have to order seed early on in the winter, and letting your vendors know, or the people you're buying from know that you may have this thing coming, and I'd like to have seed for it. That can be pretty tricky, because they sometimes like to have their orders taken care of early on.
Yeah, and how about, I'm sorry, cut you off here.
Oh, and then just in knowing that this is a farm program and that cash flow might be tough in the spring, making sure you have enough money set aside to run your project, to get your project started before you can get reimbursed. Because reimbursement could be, your first reimbursement could be in May or even June, depending on how everything goes with the contracting process. Because you'll learn you've received the award, go through contracting, and sometimes you won't get the go-ahead to bill SARE until maybe April, and then it's about a month before you could receive your first reimbursement. So it can take a little while.
Yeah, great. Thanks for reminding us about that. I wonder if you can touch, before we stop for more questions, could you touch on data collection, how that went, did it go as planned, and the report writing?
Of course, yeah. So data collection, my background is in science, so it's and if yours is not, it's really good to touch base with a technical advisor. But keep your data is your most precious material. So you keep records, and you take your readings in the field, and you get them right on a computer. Losing your data is losing all your work and the value of your seed or materials or anything like that. Keeping data security and taking really close measurements is really the most important thing.
And then just maybe how was report writing for you?
Report writing was relatively straightforward for me, coming from a science background, but I would say that it can be relatively time consuming. You will be doing 2 reports, an annual and a final report typically. You can do more, or you can just do your final report early, but it is good to sort of get your get everything organized for the final report, which is more of a how everything went as opposed to showing all of your data. With collecting data, it's really important to figure out how to present it, how to show it in a way that's useful to not just you or people who might be doing the research end of things, but to other farmers. The end goal is to share your work with other people that might be using it in the field, other people who this might make a difference in their everyday life.
Right. So that brings us around full circle. The goal of Northeast SARE, the mission is that farms be more sustainable. And how we do that is not only the report, but we require that the farmers do outreach, at least one form of outreach to other farmers. It could be, what did you do on this one, Jordan?
For this one, let's see. I've had reports go out through some of the industry's listservs that are pretty well read for the Northeast for aquaculture. That was the biggest way things went out. One of the things that's worked really well for others is seeking press, finding local papers, local news outlets love talking about what people are doing, particularly if they can get outside and get pictures and things like that. That's a really good way to get a lot of exposure for your project. That can be just regular news or trade publications. And then social media, which I was sort of skeptical of at first. The amount of people sharing at least aquaculture, not necessarily all agriculture, but certainly aquaculture, new methods is just, I regularly talk to other farmers around the world about what they're doing, and it's been a surprisingly great way to share the work I've done through SARE.
Great, thanks. So now we're going into a little Halloween fun for you to give you a little time to send your questions to Deb. So we're taking a break, and it could be addressed to me or both of us, doesn't matter.
Right, so yeah, so this is our one of our 3 question and answer periods. So what you want to do is open up the question and answer pod, which is typically on the bottom of your screen, and you'll just click on that Q&A, and just type in your question, and I'll read them out loud. And we have a few questions in the queue right now around technical advisors. So what constitutes a technical advisor, and where do you find them?
So a technical advisor is anyone who can help you with your project. Not all of them are science-based, so that's what Jordan had. But sometimes you are the expert in the field. I've had farmers say, well, I know everything there is to know about this. Why do I need a technical advisor? Well, the minimum they can do is read over your proposal before you submit it. Give them the application instructions, and they're going to say, oh, you could strengthen this part up. Sometimes they can help you. Maybe they read more publications or journals or, trade magazines than you do, or have been to Canada or read things around the world, and they could maybe help you bolster your background information. They could also, maybe they're just going to do help you with outreach. They have connections, they have listservs, they can put you on the schedule for a talk somewhere. So it's whatever will help you with your project. That's what a technical advisor is. It can be any professional, it can be another farmer, and the technical advisor does not have to be in your region, your locale, your state. Some of them are even out of the region. It's just, someone who's committed to helping you with your project. So that's, we have a few videos online of examples of other farms, but Jordan, you already had a connection with your technical advisor?
I did, yeah. So I learned a lot of my aquaculture background through the Sea Grant Cooperative Extension Program from Maine.
Yeah, so for him it was easy, and the person wanted to do it. So any other questions, Deb?
Yeah, related to technical advisors, there's a few questions about fees that a technical advisor might generate. Let's see, travel. Can we cover their travel expenses through the grant? And can we pay them, for example, as a consultant fee?
Yeah, so different professionals, technical advisors have different requirements, and some of them are already paid and it's part of their job, maybe in Jordan, that case. So they don't need or want money for their salaries, but some of them would like travel if it's extra. So yes, there we have a section in the budget where it's usually by the mile. They get reimbursed if they need special lodging because it's far away. Those type of expenses, yes, we would cover that.
Mm-hmm.
If they do, say they're private consultants and they do want to be paid for their time, you can definitely factor that in.
Okay, great. And just as a resource, we do have a guide for technical advisors on the Farmer Grant site, and we'll make sure you have that website before we leave today. So that is another extra resource to help sort of think about technical advisor. So next question, would a project based at a processing facility associated with an aquaculture farm qualify?
If they're the applicants, a farmer has to be the applicant.
Okay.
So a processor or for example, that what is a farm document is good because we do mention it. So say like a compost maker is a service, it's not a farm.
Mm-hmm.
So the applicant has to be a farmer. Perhaps the farmer should apply, and then that could be part of the project working with a processor, but the processor can't, no.
Okay, this person is in their first year of farming, and as a result, next year will be their first crop for sale. So having said that, they believe that they're not quite qualified for the grant yet because they haven't had any sales. Is that correct?
Technically, yes. We have had people call in. We do fund beginner farmers. And if you can show you've invested and you've already put, it's like your expenses are this year, you've invested like and put the crop in the ground or whatever it is you have, you could make the case that we are going to have this for sure. We've already got our markets. So the reviewers, so that by the time the award came around, you'd be selling. So that's a little gray area, but it's more, do you have the infrastructure? Are you intentional that you're going to be a commercial farmer, or is you're just kind of a gardener and dabbling in it? So I would say call me and I'll talk you through it.
Mm-hmm. Can you just remind us how the available funds per grant and if matching funds are required?
Right. So you can ask for up to $15,000 of funds from SARE and a grant. We do not require matching. If in your proposal you show you already have infrastructure or you are going to, cover something, that's always good to say, but we don't want that in the budget itself. It's not required.
Okay, and I think we need to move on, but last question. Do you fund soil fertility type projects?
Oh, we definitely fund those.
Oh, I'm sorry, and there's one more question.
Okay.
I'm sorry. We'll have more time to answer any questions we don't have time for right now, but are there limits on equipment expenses? Is equipment purchased used for the purpose of research allowed?
Yeah, well, I'll answer it now. We're going to go into it later, but I'm happy to talk about it now. SARE funds the cost of doing the study. If there is a specialized equipment that you want to test, we first ask that you rent it. If you can't rent it and it's very crucial and you've got a good case for why you're doing this research, then we have a formula, and I'll show that later on. SARE will share the cost as if you were renting it. So what you paid for it, what the lifespan is, what's the depreciation per year, so I'll go through that. So it is possible. It can't be a regular piece of equipment you would have on a farm. It has to be something very special. So, and I'll go into this later, but it's a good question.
Okay. I'm going to let you talk some more, and then we'll open it back up for questions a little bit later.
Right. So the next section is a little more nuts and bolts. It's how to apply. Okay. So on the application instructions, there is a website you go to. I'm actually on a kind of a dummy one, staging, but it's projectsare.org. It's actually the same site where you would submit your report. So what you want to do is it'll bring you here. So this is how you actually go through and submit your proposal. So if you've already been funded, you already have a username and password, so you just log in. Otherwise, you would create an account. So just read through these if you forget, and that'll tell you what to do. Or you can search projects and say what was funded, and then you can put in keywords. So you can create an account. So you can all see that. You need to put in email, username, first name. And then I just want to mention at the end, we do have demographic information that we ask for. It's federally, it's requested, but you do not have to answer. For example, prefer not to answer, whatever you want to put in there. And it's just so that it's not tied to your project. It's so we know who we're serving. So I'm just going to go back. So I already have a username for the fake system. So I'm going to log in, and so you'll see that. And what happens is when you create an account, you will get an email and it'll say, go back and set your password. So I'm not going to show you that. That's pretty easy. So I've already, so most of you are going to, even if you are already in the system, you're going to start a new grant proposal. But I'm going to show you some that I have, and it asks you to do this again. It wants to make sure. Okay. So if you notice, actually, I'm going to go back. I want to show you something. Okay, so you're going to click on Start a New One. And all the regions use this now. So try not to make the mistake of going to another region and filling one out. Go to the Northeast. And right now, there's only farmer grants. So I'm going to, you would begin a new proposal. But what I'm going to do is look at the 7 that I have played around in right now. So you'll begin it. And I've already given it a title. It'll ask for a title. You can edit it and then save. You can change it at any time. You can create a draft of it. And then for each so here's the overview page that tells you in general. All these sections you need to fill out or at least answer one question. If you ever need to know how to navigate, you go to help. And that'll tell you how to navigate through the whole system and what to enter and how to add things. So here, I'll just go to the general information. So every question, we have start dates, when you're gonna start. So then you would pick a date and then save it. So everything needs to be saved. The way to change something is to edit. These commodities are many things to fill out. And sometimes if you're doing marketing or a quality of life topic, it doesn't apply to a specific commodity, excuse me. Okay, so I always go back to the overview, and that brings me right back. So you fill out different sections, and when you're done this section, because there are required questions or uploads, a check will form. If you haven't done it, an asterisk will still be there, and then you'll need to fill that out. So most projects, even though this is marketing, you're not raising animals on a study. So most of you, it is a required question, but most of you are going to say no. But if you say yes, you need to fill out how are you going to manage the animals, and so that we can comply with USDA kind of humane treatment of animals to make sure that happens, and also it's for reviewers to read. So I'm going to save that. Okay, I'm going to go back to the overview. So sorry if I'm going too fast, but I just wanted to give you, so you have a good feel of the system. So now look what happened. That check, I have all my sections filled out. Now I can submit. If you have any of these that are not complete, there'll be an asterisk, and that won't be there. So now you can press submit. And they want to make sure, do you really want to submit? You say yes. So it's submitted. You need to do it by 5 o'clock on December 3rd. So say you've done it today because you're so fast. It opened yesterday. And you're like, oh, shoot, there's another citation. There's another thing I just read. I want to go change my statement of need, and so you can actually unsubmit. Now you will get an email each time and says, you're unsubmitted. Now, if you unsubmit and you forget to submit it again, you have not submitted your proposal. We won't accept it. So just make sure you can always come back and check and see where you're at with it. Okay, I think that's all I want to show with that. Okay, I'm going to have to flip through some. These were just ones if I wasn't able to have that. Okay, so we're going to start in the next section, and we'll always help you with that part of it, the actual online submission section. Call us and we'll help walk you through it if you're having problems. Okay, so we did talk about technical advisor quite a bit, and as with Jordan's case, extension or university specialist. You can have a private consultant, veterinarians, if it's livestock. My background is livestock production, so I probably say that more than anything because that's what I'm familiar with the most. We've had State Agency of Agriculture staff. One of our videos, farmers used the Department of Ag in Massachusetts staff and dairy quality. Sometimes company reps, you work with them and they have something they want you to test. Or an experienced farmer in a neighbor or another state even. And again, we have, as in the bottom of the slide, that we have videos to give examples if you want to see more. So, so I would just reach out in your area, I would start with extension, and if they don't have a specialty in your area, ask them if they know anyone. Okay, so this is what's required. So kind of the important information, but not as exciting as talking about the projects themselves. But so on the left side, you have to have a letter of commitment from that technical advisor, and they should describe themselves, what role they're going to play, and a little bit of input on why they think it's a good project. So that's required. And the other thing that is required is you'll fill out this spreadsheet, which we provide in our online on the website, and you'll upload that. So those are definitely required. On the right column is if you work for an entity, if you're an employee of a commercial farm, or you work for a nonprofit or other entity like university, but there is a commercial farm operation on it, you need to have your employer agree that it's okay, one, to do the project, and they're going to handle the money. So they need to have the capacity and agree to do that. Okay, you'll need, if you have someone else sometimes farmers replicate it on another farm, or sometimes they have a co-advisor, so to speak, who's just as important, who's actually helping them significantly with part of the study. It's not like paying for a service or you're hiring an employee. This is someone who's very integral to the project. So they would do the same thing as a technical advisor. They describe themselves, what role, and you would submit that too. If you're doing kind of a generic production plot, experiment, you would have a plot design. This is to help the reviewers understand what you're doing. It'll enhance what you write. So maybe you're better at images than you are at describing things. So this will just make sure that they understand, because our reviewers are from the agricultural field, but they might not be an expert in your area. That said, usually for very specific not as common projects like aquaculture, we do get outside input to make sure we are evaluating it well. Perhaps you're trying to change how employees, you know, keep track of things. So maybe you're trying different tools for that, you know, that have to do more with behavior, motivating behavior. So what are you going to do to measure that change? So if you're doing any types of surveys, they could be marketing, like if we do this, do we get more customers? Do they buy more of that? Then provide, and it could be just a preliminary one if you're not quite finalized on it. So a survey tool is very useful to reviewers. If you're inventing something, just, it could be a drawing, it could be a photo, anything you want. Again, it helps the reviewers know what you're talking about. If you're saying, I think doing something one way will be cheaper, then you could probably pencil out what it looks like on paper for the reviewers as well. So proof of concept, of feasibility, you know, financial analysis is, oh, well, it looks pretty good, or it looks close. We got to see what actually happens. That's always, we would like to see that if that's what you're doing. Okay, as I said, December 3rd, that's a Tuesday, 5 o'clock Eastern time. So remember to submit. And I think Jordan would agree, you want to do that. You don't really want to wait till that 5 o'clock, 4:49 period, right, Jordan?
No, you definitely do not.
Yeah.
And just one of the things I found is, though I don't know, I don't know if you recommend this, keeping. I write in a Word document and paste over,
Oh, yeah.
because sometimes the system has, in the past, it actually is a different system in the past, but it was glitchy, so you can lose your work as you go along. So just make sure you have it someplace stored locally. I would highly recommend, and
Yeah.
done early, and submit it as early as you have it done.
Right. And oh, go ahead.
Oh, and talk to your technical advisor early, because you'll need the letter. Everything needs to come on time, and you know these people, other people are busy, so just make sure that stuff comes in well ahead of the 3rd at 5 o'clock.
Great, thanks. We do supply a worksheet with just the questions in a Word doc that you can actually just have the questions in front of you and the word count, and then you can just fill it in and then cut and paste. So it's only online. We don't accept that Word document. Once you submit it, we are very busy combining them and giving them out to reviewers. There's a review period. You'll not immediately, but you'll get an email back with and then we'll ask to see how the whole process was for you, because we try to improve it every year. If you're disqualified, you're not really a farm, or maybe the idea just doesn't fit SARE, then we'll let you know right away, so you're not waiting. Whoops, sorry. We announce it by late February 2020, and then we start, as Jordan said, issuing the contracts. So we go over your budget, we clean everything up. There's certain rules. The contract is actually with the University of Vermont. The federal funds come through the university, so they have their rules, we have federal rules, we have SARE rules. So we have to make sure it all lines up. And then if you did not get funded, we try within a few months to give you the comments from the reviewers, so that you can say, oh, you know, you weren't really much off the mark, but it is competitive, and maybe if you worked on this, you could submit it next year. So we like to let you know how you did from our perspective, because you put the time in, so we really want to share what the reviewer said, but we do edit all those down, so it takes time. Okay, so here's a point where you can ask any questions, and we still have one more section.
Carol, there's a couple of questions still on the equipment expense, and it sounds like you're going to cover that in the next sort of section.
Yeah, we'll wait. Yeah, we'll wait.
Okay. And while we have Jordan, there was a question about aquaculture and sort of how you categorize. Do you consider aquaculture critters as livestock? Like how, I'm just curious how those, there's a couple of questions about invertebrates and how to categorize them.
Oh, well, I'm just going to jump in. If it has to do with the livestock section, care section of the proposal, it says they're not vertebrates, they're invertebrates, and we don't require you to fill that out.
Okay.
If that was the question, but go ahead. Jordan, if there was.
Oh, but certainly there are categories that fit both for crop production or pest management if you're talking about fouling or things like that. So there's a lot of different ways to fit in aquaculture projects.
Okay.
Okay, and I think I don't have anything else in the queue except for that equipment question. So I think I'm just going to encourage you to
keep going.
Yeah.
Okay, yep. I don't want to get too far. Okay, so good timing, good segue. SARE does not fund businesses to start up. Sometimes they're saying, oh, we have the sustainable, we want to start this sustainable farm and permaculture, but we don't, there must be other programs for that, but not SARE. We do studies on how to help other farmers, the results of which would help other farmers be more sustainable. So we don't fund major structures like barns or sheds. Maybe someone has to redo something because it's a different way of treating. For example, someone was looking at how to force endive or endive in their barn. So they did get money to insulate a room inside their barn because they normally wouldn't have done that. So we would pay for that. But a major renovation, somebody wanted to put all LED lights in their dairy barn. That's not something SARE would fund. So if the equipment is normal to your operation, tractors, if you're a vegetable farm, seeders, things like that, you need to have that already. If it's to change something or really specialized piece of equipment that you're just not sure, then that's possible to buy. And I'll go over about sharing the cost with SARE. You can't buy any ATVs or quads with SARE money. Cell phones or cell phone charges. Sometimes there are prototypes where they use a little phone to convey the information and it's part of the unit they're making. So if it's definitely all designated for the project, it's possible. But in general, no cell phones or cell phone charges. We can't pay for feeding people unless there's a training and it keeps the continuation of the meeting going. We don't do any kind of swag, promotional gifts or giveaways like pens or bags or hats. Can't do that, or shirts. Let's see. So any normal operating expenses. So say, for example, you're looking at different ways of treating poultry hens who lay eggs. Again, another livestock example. You'd ask for the extra time it took to do that study, but you wouldn't ask to get paid for collecting the eggs unless there was something about the collection that was taking more time. Like you had to write down something. That we'd pay extra, but we're not going to pay for the whole time of collecting eggs because you normally do that. So just think of that. Purchases, again, as Jordan said, if you make it before that, I believe it's February 24th, we can't reimburse you for it. But what we do fund is personnel, your time. And, Jordan was talking about all the time it took to do the data collection. You can actually hire somebody to do that. You can pay for that. A co-farmer, co-owner, if they're doing part of the study. Any materials and supplies, like if you're going to build something, or flagging for things like that. Travel, sometimes you have to travel. Sometimes your advisors have to travel. Printing and publications, say you're going to do a flyer for a field day, or you're doing a fact sheet after. Equipment rental, testing, soil, someone asked about soil tests. Be very specific in the budget. Consultant fees and travel and presenting. Okay, so here's that example of equipment. So here's a farm project where they needed to identify insects using a microscope. They didn't have a microscope, and microscopes last a good amount of time. This is it costs $1,600. So they did a calculation, and we provide an example of this. Say they feel it's going to last 10 years, so it's $160 per year. So 320 would be what would be the cost for 2 years. So SARE would pay 320. If I did that right or not. Okay, renting. Sometimes, remember, there's extra plots. Well, Jordan found one that I guess was free, but if you had to rent a plot, you could ask for that. Or if you had to take land out of production that you normally would be making money, you could justify getting paid for that acre. So those are examples of equipment and rentals. All right, and you can ask me again at the end if I didn't answer that, but these are the questions you need to answer. So and then there's a paper Word doc, a Word document that just have these questions, and you can just fill it in and then cut and paste. So the reviewers, number one, want to know can you do the project? And that includes you and your technical advisor and anybody else involved. If you need to hire someone and you don't know who that will be, you can just say, hired labor. Then the next is pretty important, and it's what's the problem? What's the issue? What's the opportunity? Why is it important? And what are you going to do to help make it better? Then you've got to look back. Well, just like Jordan said, you're not doing something again that's already been done. Sometimes people have great ideas, but it's been done before. So that's why you need to check. And sometimes not. They have a great ideas. They don't even know it, that it's the only one, but they go back and check. What have others done? Oh, it is. No one's done this before. Then if you do that and you read other things and you're saying, well, this trade article said this, then we want to have you put where you found that. So that's called a citation list. Then you go boil down to what are your objectives? What do you want to do? What are the questions you're going to ask? How are you going to measure them? So then that leads right into the 6 materials and methods. This is exactly what you're going to do. It's as if you're writing a little manual saying what you're going to do, how are you going to measure it, when you're going to measure it, by what process are you going to measure it. So you're very specific, because reviewers, if you just say I'm going to do a soil test, that doesn't say anything. You want to say I'm going to sample 3 times a season and do this special Solvita method, so be very specific on how you're going to do it and how you are going to handle the samples if that's what you're going to do. It could also be I'm going to survey before, during, and after we do this special marketing, push. So that's another thing in the methods. And then that's where you would also upload any documents, images, surveys, plot plans, anything. Okay, number 7, this will help you with your budget, your timeline, and also it relates to what Jordan was saying about the figuring out how long it takes. The timeline, we have you list what activities in what month, say, and then you can put an hourly estimate. And that really helps you and the reviewers. Outreach, it's very simple. What are you going to do to tell other farmers about it? Okay, I'll keep going here. So this last part, because I think we're getting close, I'm just going to give you a little more in depth about how do you write a compelling grant proposal, because we want you to do the best possible and compete well. So these questions are pretty important. Have you convinced the reviewers? What's the problem? What's your objectives? It should be really easy to summarize. It should be just you should be able to do it kind of in your head. And if it's easy, if it's hard to summarize, then I think you need to do a little more work on being clear of what you want to do. And like Jordan says, don't do too much. Just simplify it if it seems hard to summarize. Are you repeating anything? So reviewers want to know, is this current information or are they just reinventing the wheel? And then, okay, great idea. You've convinced the reviewers. So where some applicants fall down is they don't say how they're going to do it. So you're like, can they really do it? So those are things you should probably focus on a lot. I just said all that. I'm going to move to the next slide. So here are some specific examples. They're not the only way to do it, but as I said, in this question, what's the problem? You're really trying to grab the reviewers, convince them that it's significant. So here's an example. It's actually one of Jordan's. So very clear description of the issue. The fouling of agriculture gear with non-crop species provides one of the greatest sources of labor. He's already said big labor commitment to cleaning this gear. Okay, so that lets you know. And if we can't stop this fouling, it can also lead to crop mortality. So then it's going to be related to production. Remember those 5 themes? And then has an idea, let's do crop shading. Maybe that would be environmentally friendly. So instead of spraying or doing some other thing that is not as environmentally friendly. So this person, so Jordan has tied it right into the sustainability themes. And who is it going to affect? So that's in your, so it's going to affect all shellfish farmers using floating cage system. Very clear. So this is what reviewers like to see. Again, what helps, and again, you might not be able to do this, but if you find or you actually do preliminary studies, reviewers love that because they're not taking such a big risk or leap of faith of something that's new. You could say, well, they're doing this in India, or they're doing it somewhere else, or they did it in the Northeast, or I did it last year, just a little plot, but this is what I found. So it's based on preliminary research, is great. And then shows that you are connected to some other resources. Your technical advisor can help you with that. And then make sure you, here's your reference, and then you have your full citation. And then what are you going to do? You're going to compare what? It'll, you know, usually when in a study, you compare something to a control. We've mentioned background research, so don't just stop with SARE projects. It's great, you know, definitely do that. Our reviewers don't necessarily know everything that's in the SARE database or have the time to go look through it all. So if there is something significant, so that's a graduate student grant in this case, and it's best not to just list it, you should interpret it, not just, okay, I found all these are doing it, working in this area, forage radishes. Well, what did they do, and how would you build on that? That's what they want to know. How are you going to build on what's happened already? So this project proposal gave an interpretation, not just listed them all. And then don't stop with SARE because we don't have all the current research. And this is just an example. You can find that anywhere on how to write a full citation. Your objectives, again, they've got to be clear. Are field peas, our question is, do field peas, are they a viable option in organic cereal? Rotations will be beneficial to both grain and livestock producers. And then here's the proposal. The objective is to monitor yield, disease susceptibility, weed pressure, and ease of harvest. So this is what we'll require to measure. And then in your materials and methods, you're going to say how. I think we're getting to the end. And so again, be very specific on your measurements and your when you're going to do it, what are your standards, and then you'll have a timeline at the end. So we're reaching the end here. The resources can be found on our website. We go to get a grant, and you get a link. You'll have the budget justification that you fill out, and then you have that Word doc for proposal preparation. What is a farm? It has also topics and guide for technical advisors. All right. So let us know if you have any questions.
Great. We have a couple of minutes left, and we do have quite a few questions in the queue. So one of them is, how do you calculate the value of a farmer's time?
Good question. It depends sometimes on the activity. Sometimes they'll break it down into, you know, I'm out in the field, and it's what you'd pay somebody. But if you're a manager and you're writing a report, you're doing calculations. So it can be anywhere from $15 an hour. If you're doing basic stuff on the farm, what you'd pay someone to, you could charge $50 an hour, just depending on the skill of what you're doing. And if you want to go in the middle and say, I'm going to get paid the same for every hour thing, that's okay too. I don't know, Jordan, how did you do it?
I started out, and I've had to revise each year as the farm's gotten more, but sort of valuing my time, figuring out kind of what I made as an hourly as a farmer, and kind of using that as a base, I guess.
Okay, great. Next question.
Do you fund drones for agricultural use?
I thought of that as an example. We would not fund drones itself. So again, this is a great equipment question. If you want to use a drone in doing a study, then that's okay. Maybe it would be the time you used it, or we'd pay for the study. But no, wouldn't buy drone. That, I would say call me on that. It really depends on the study. And I do know there are some really cheap ones. So it's a new field for me. So I would suggest you call me.
And then just to confirm, you do fund value-added processes. That is a topic that we fund.
Yes, definitely. They might be comparing one way to value add to another. Yep.
Would fencing count as material or equipment?
Fencing could count as materials and supplies or equipment. We have done it as equipment, where again, so say you're buying electric netting fencing and splitting up a pasture more than you normally would. Well, we would share the cost, just like that equipment formula that I did.
What if there are no prices for renting the equipment? How do you calculate?
Yeah, so then it would be what does it cost and how long are you using it? So that same way we did the microscope.
Okay, and labor from university or college staff allowed for reimbursement?
Yes, sometimes it's tricky to pay them. Just make sure that college or university will give you an invoice and you pay them, because we don't pay them, you pay them. So make sure that that's the way that they want to do it. And then you'd get reimbursed for what you paid them. Okay, go ahead, Jordan.
Oh, I don't know if there's much more to add beyond that, but on a project where, and this might be a good side note, when something goes wrong, I broke my foot in the middle of the project, not related to the project. I was able to hire a grad student to be able to do the field work when I was not able to. We reallocated what would have been my hours into their hours.
Good.
And SARE is very understanding and flexible when big things happen. So I love that.
So this question has to do with draft animals. They're not being specifically used for production, growth, or sale, but should they include them in the livestock section of the proposal?
If they're part of the study, so say you're saying I'm going to compare tractor pulled, cultivation to horse pulled. We actually had one like that. Then the extra costs of doing that, if it took more labor time to do, just whatever you think is reasonable, that's the extra charge for doing the study. We wouldn't buy them. So if you're actually using them in it, yes, you would have to fill that out, that section out, because you're using them.
And last question, would supplies used to build out 4 various innovative low-cost cold storage designs be allowed?
If you were comparing, so this would be a good one, different cold storages, then it is possible, and you were doing the building, you already had a structure, but inside you're going to build different side-by-side ways to do that, then it's possible we'd pay for the supplies, yes, to build those, yes.
And Carol, can you back up to your previous slide, because people want to know how to contact you directly?
Okay. You don't want the joke? Come on.
And with that, we are out of time. So I want to make sure to thank our audience for participating today. Of course, Carol, thank you, Carol, and especially Jordan, for your time. I really appreciate it. Just as a reminder, I put in the chat the link to the Farmer Grant website, and also note that this webinar is being recorded and we'll post it. So if you want to take another look through, I'm happy to do that. And I like that we are ending with the slide with Carol, so that if you have questions for her about this program, you can contact her. And with that, thanks a lot.
Thanks. Hope to hear from you.
Bye, everybody.